Okay, let's start. So we are ready. So thank you so much for the British and Columbia Chambers of Commerce with this great panel today. The idea is just to have a great conversation regarding to the fintechs and specifically cyber and the situation in UK and also in Latin America. First of all, I would like to ask all of you to introduce yourself and your company and what is your offering in order to be known from the audience. So maybe Anu, can you start?
Yeah, sure. Well, hello everybody, and it's a pleasure to join you today for the last.
We cannot hear very well.
Oh, okay. Shall I come a bit closer? Is that any better?
That's better. That's okay.
Is that any better? Okay. Well, thank you everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here today and join the panel. My name's Anu Kermi. I'm from Templar Executives. We're a UK-based cybersecurity company with an international client set. So my background is IBM for over 20 years, and then I joined Templar when they were working in the Cabinet Office. Templar were responsible for writing the UK's and contributing to the UK's first information assurance strategy way back in 2006, and since then have contributed to subsequent national cybersecurity strategies. The company works across all parts of the cybersecurity agenda and has a range of solutions and services. And we work not just with clients, but with governments and with the regulators and with academia as well. So there is a spectrum of stakeholders that we engage in as part of our cybersecurity activities. In terms of our portfolio of offerings, we have business consultancy and technical services. And there we offer a whole range of capabilities, all the way from risk assessments through to pen testing, through to any other kind of strategy and strategy and policy reviews, communications and transformation projects to do with cyber. We also have the Cyber Academy, and the Cyber Academy has probably got the largest portfolio of NCSC certified training courses in the world. And we range all the way from board briefings and NED briefings through to specific security roles such as the Senior Information Risk Owner and the CISO, all the way to the front line and cybersecurity awareness. And we also cover business functions in terms of the training and courses that are available. We also offer the Cyber as a Service offering, which is really, in effect, an expertise in terms of managed outsourcing on cyber, especially as the agenda is so fluid and fast-moving. It's very difficult for many organizations to keep abreast of that agenda. And this is a really good way of getting some expertise in to advise and guide your organization and your executives. We also offer cyber security services, and again, there is a range of offerings in there which are to do with cyber, including things like threat intelligence. So we look at open source environments, and we have a threat intelligence capability that also scrapes the dark web and looks at open source endpoints and brings that together into actionable intelligence for our clients. We also have business continuity management, which I don't need to tell the audience today, but it's very pertinent in terms of remediation and being prepared for a cyber attack. So those are the kind of offerings that Templar offer. And our client base is across many different sectors. We work with the UK NHS, and we are a strategic partner to the UK government. We also work in financial services, where we have a partnership with organisations like the Investment Association and provide briefings and services. And the other big area for us is maritime. So we have a big maritime capability in terms of incident response and risk assessments. We work in education, transport, and are a strategic advisor to UK nuclear civil sector as well. Finally, in addition to that, because so many of our clients are global, we work very closely with the Department of International Trade and the FCDO, and with with ministers in different countries, looking at how we can share our experiences and provide solutions and services based on the portfolio of offerings we have. Thank you, Claudia.
Okay, thank you, Anu. Marguerite, your turn.
Sure. Okay, so at Altia, we're providers in the delivery of specialist investigation software. So my role specifically, I look after North and South America as a regional manager. So we have experience working with investigators in a variety of different sectors to provide solutions. So for example, 100% of UK police forces use our software, as well as public and private sector organisations in 22 countries around the world, and that includes clients within Latin America and the Caribbean as well. We also have customers within local and central government organisations. So in terms of our offerings, we provide solutions for investigation and case management, and we also provide software for anybody dealing with covert operations, and importantly, and what's relevant for today is sort of financial investigations. So clients that work within law enforcement agencies or government in departments like fraud teams, money laundering teams, economic crime units, and to try and investigate financial crime, essentially. So our software helps to make that process more efficient and more effective. So it just really streamlines processes, but ensures that it's highly secure and trusted as well. So we're linked to cybersecurity in the sense that a lot of our customers work in that world, in cybercrime teams in different agencies around the world. And also within fraud and money laundering, which is something that has increased and something that we'll obviously be talking a bit more about today. So that's a brief introduction of Altia and what we do.
Thank you, Marguerite. Steve.
Thank you, Claudia, and welcome everybody to those that are in the session. I'm Steve Wright, co-founder and COO of EBP Source. We're a UK technology company. Most of our clients are outside the UK, all around the world. What we specialize in is building high volume, high transaction digital platforms for centralizing bills, invoices, documents, and payments. So this is across all different industry sectors. We tend to work with central banks, national banks, governments, digital government programs, as well as bank consortiums and central payment processors, as well as individual billers and financial institutions. And we put together these national platforms that allow end consumers to be able to take their mobile, for example, and receive all of their documents, their bills, their invoices, their statements, anything that they would historically have received on paper, to receive that electronically. And typically it's done through online banking, through mobile banking, also through customer portals, apps, as well as facilitating electronic payment for any document which has a transaction, a financial transaction associated with it. So we've done this in about 35 countries around the world, including a number of countries in Latin America, currently doing a lot of work in the Caribbean, and it's helping to transform societies in some of those countries. And we're very proud to have been involved in a number of projects that have seen some pretty substantial and significant global recognition, including one United Nations award for the best public service project worldwide a few years ago. I will talk more about that when we get around to the debating today's session, Claudia. Thank you.
So, Steve.
Mike?
I'm sorry, Mike. Yes, sorry.
That's all right. It easily happens. I've been called a lot worse. I'm Mike Kessler, CEO and founder of Tokenize. So we actually have a stock exchange group that is built on tokenization of security. So we have an FCA broker-dealer license over here in the UK. We also have a stock exchange license in Barbados in the Caribbean, as well as a brokerage license in the Caribbean. And we're applying at the moment for what's called a central securities depository license as well. What we're looking to do is we're looking to build a kind of full stack stock exchange, but using kind of innovative technologies and different instruments within the capital markets. So we are looking to be a global stock exchange trading on a 24/7 basis in new types of products, whether those are fractional ownership of physical assets or digital assets. So it could be fractional ownerships of property. It could be fractional ownerships of pieces of art, or you could even have fractional ownership of NFTs. And what we would be able to do is operate those on both what's called a primary market, where you go out and raise capital against a prospectus and subscribe to that offering. Or you might do it as a direct listing and go straight onto our secondary market, where you could trade in those tokens directly. So it's not just fractional ownership. We can also look at things like royalties and how we can potentially disintermediate some of the kind of institutions within the process. I'm not trying to take anything away from anyone, but at the same time, if we can make it as frictionless as possible. So, for example, you might have a band or a footballer or a energy producing company that all produce revenue or profits, and you can give people a token that represents their security in that underlying asset. So whether that's based on revenue or whether it's based on profits, and then they can trade those tokens in the secondary market. So whether it's that someone had, I don't know, tokens in the Rolling Stones and the revenue stream that they produce, or tokens in a wind farm based on a power purchase agreement, you can receive the income, but also you can trade those in a secondary market. And we can do all the settlement or the banking side of things as well. So what we're looking to do is disrupt the markets in terms of try and offer something that most people focus on, the kind of ultra large organizations for a listing, more traditional in terms of plain vanilla equities. We're looking at how we can change that model and also be financially inclusive and democratize access to products across the world. So someone in Venezuela who is going through particular issues with inflation and stuff, they could potentially hedge their position or investments and buy some real estate in Manhattan or wherever it ended up being on a fractional basis. So that's what we're looking to do. We should be launching hopefully in the next 3 to 4 months. We've got a number of deals in the pipeline, but I think it's also imperative that we are a trusted exchange, because the whole thing is built around trust, and it's also built around a network effect. So coupled with that comes the whole trust of cybersecurity as well, which obviously some of my fellow panelists are far more expert in than I ever will be. But I think it's making sure that we have all of those components in place so that we're a trusted exchange, because ultimately we've got to protect investors' capital. So that's what we are and what we're doing.
Okay, thank you so much. We have a great panel here with a lot of experience in different topic that's real right now is on the top on the agenda. Just to do a brief introduction regarding to the fintech and evolution of fintech in Latin America. We have right now some doubts about how fintech sector will look in the long term. Maybe in the future, financial services will be integrated into our lives, that the term of fintech could become not relevant. Between banks and fintech, maybe we have not winners and not losers. Maybe traditional companies will be platforms in the future that provide the scale for fintech to reach all potential clients in the sectors. Banks could be the highway between clients and other service providers. In the future, collaboration is not only essential, it is a must for the industry. The future of fintech is in providing the technology because they offer a full end user experience through brands they already know and trust. I mean the clients. So with this landscape, the question is, will the sector disappear? Probably not, but it will look at least different from 2025 as it does today from 2010. So we are seeing right now an evolution of fintech sector and the collaboration with banks. With this landscape, I would like to start with cyber topic, which is very relevant right now. So I know there is always talk of security at the level of banks. However, very rarely the focus is placed on the consumer. So how it's done to make the customer aware of this issue?
That's a really interesting question, because there is an argument that says with fintechs and other organizations, it's always a question of where you put your investment, because investment is limited, and how far is it put into developing the systems, and how far is it looking at your client base. And we're seeing mainstream banks at the moment who have matured and are putting and support clients in terms of giving them advice and guidance. It's still not enough, that's obvious to all of us. But it's also a question of how do the fintechs deal with this? And one of the big things for them has to be looking at privacy as in terms of their design of their technology and services and solutions, and trying to get, because they are quite often greenfield sites, it's trying to get that right, as well as doing all the other things they need to do in terms of solutions. In terms of how you protect consumers, I think it's as much, there is a big onus on consumers to protect themselves as well through education and training and awareness, because they really need to help themselves, and raising awareness isn't just one-sided. It needs to be done from both the client who's using the technology and the technology providers. And we know that banking has always been a great target for cyber criminals. It's a multi-trillion pound business, and it will continue to be, and it has a lot of personal and sensitive data that banks need to utilize in order to identify and authenticate their clients and maintain their accounts. And we know the whole technology is moving into digital and mobile, and has been for quite a long time, especially in Latin America. And we've seen mobile technology being used for banking en masse now, and it's growing all the time. So I always say there's sort of a couple of key areas if you want to try and protect yourselves. Education and awareness is really one of the most cost-effective ways in order to prevent cyber criminals from being successful, especially around issues like phishing and malware. So if we can also, so that's the first one, but if we can also identify the risk activity, do customers know what a fraud looks like? Can they point out what could be obviously suspicious activity? So that education will go a long way towards helping them, as well as the bank, in terms of avoiding a data breach or an attack. So you need to tell them what to look out for. And again, what in the old days, phishing used to be obvious, but still a new product where people didn't know, you had misspellings and things, but now they're a lot more sophisticated in terms of how you get phishing attacks. So that education has to be there. Engaging customers in fraud prevention, telling them customers should monitor their bank accounts regularly to make sure they're not seeing anything untoward in their credit accounts anymore. Avoiding public Wi-Fi when you're doing banking transactions is an absolute must. You shouldn't be doing your banking in a cafe or coffee bar without checking that you're actually connecting to the right website address of your bank. And we often see what we call man-in-the-middle attacks, where someone hijacks your access. because they have set up a similar website. Strengthening passwords is always, I mean, we always talk about passwords in the world of cybersecurity, but you can't really emphasize enough that strong passwords and distinct passwords for different uses and different systems are absolutely critical. And finally, you know, if banks can engage in notifications to clients if there are things that are going wrong, that really helps. So those are some of those things, and that ongoing communication is absolutely key. And also making sure clients understand what they can do if they are breached, and that there are clear guidelines and offerings available to them to help them with that. So those are some of my takeaways in terms of that area, Claudia.
Okay, thank you so much, Anu. And Margaret, with the increase of in digitization resulting from the pandemic, online fraud also increased. So what is your recommendations to follow to address this problem?
Okay, so I think the first point is to recognise that it's no longer just a law enforcement problem. It's not something that other people need to protect us from. Obviously, some of the stuff that Anu said, it's a public issue. It's everybody's problem. So I think what we need is greater intelligence and understanding, better sharing of data. And if we are talking about law enforcement, it's having a clear multi-agency strategy so that, you know, different law enforcement agencies are communicating, sharing relevant data to protect the public, but also a community and industry-wide education and prevention strategy, making sure everybody's aware of the risks and making sure that everybody's following the guidance. All of the learning in the UK and around the world is that a lot of fraud is quite simple and exploits opportunities, and whether that's, you know, people who are vulnerable, etc., businesses, but actually criminals now are finding new ways, and they're becoming more creative. They're diversifying their activities through a wider range of scams and crimes online, which obviously exploit the fear and uncertainty surrounding things like coronavirus as well. And fraud and cybercrime are on the increase. So I think what needs to take place in terms of a technology perspective is making sure that everything is modernized and up to date. So particularly law enforcement agencies are using technology that they've already got. So not just seeking out new technologies, but what already exists, and are they using those to full capacity? And in general, having modern technology in place, like systems to help analyze bank statements, or having systems to make sense of data, and that will just allow processes to be streamlined. It'll make policing easier. There'll be better quality data. It means that better quality informed decisions can be made to protect the public. And I think it's just realizing that we can't always do things the way they've been done for several years, and that changes need to be made, and we just need to embrace the technology we've got.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Steve, you digitize content and payments. And payments was the first business segment where the fintech revolution hit hard, to the point of redefining practically the entire sector. And this is very, very related with the fraud and also cyber, because in payment we move a lot of money from one point to another. After several years of transformation, what's next in this sector?
Yeah, so thank you, Claudia. Lots of questions inside one question, really. When we started out, really in the early days of the internet, we actually started by digitizing content. So we were taking historical processes for generating bank statements, consumer bills, business invoices, business bills, and generating digital versions of those. Obviously, today in many countries, now we only interact with the digital version of those documents. So we're used to interacting with PDFs and with websites and going into customer portals, logging in through secure processes. So a lot has happened around that digitization of content. It's probably fair to say that when we started, we were, from a payment perspective, we were interacting with existing payment processors and existing payment services. So when we went to making payments electronic alongside digitizing documents and bills electronically, those payments were typically being associated with a credit card or an existing electronic funds transfer or an existing direct debit, which was going through an electronic process. A lot of those processes now have started to become transformed with the evolution of new payments technologies. So we're already seeing in some countries people using digital wallets, again, on a mobile to access all of their bills for the entire country, to schedule a payment using a digital currency. We're doing this today already in Barbados, and that's world leading. But obviously, from a fraud perspective, you have to have the processes in place to validate who the end customers are when you go about acquiring those customers, when the customer signs up to use the service, when they first make a payment, when they first access a bill, identifying who those customers are and having in place robust processes to validate all of the transactions as they flow through a system. So there are most definitely... everything is getting more complicated. Everything is getting more evolved from a payments perspective. And at the same time, with that comes the challenges of authentication, making sure that your enrollment processes are appropriate for the level of security that you need to provide to access all content electronically.
Okay, great. I would like to jump up from Mike right now. Mike, without any doubt, blockchain and crypto are the topic of the moment. And within this sector, the arrival of tokenization. So in a few words, what does tokenize mean, and that is work?
Okay, so just to be clear, tokenize, from our perspective, we are securities only as an exchange. So we don't deal in crypto directly, but we have links into crypto. So what we're seeing kind of in the marketplace, but to answer your question more fully, what we're seeing in the marketplace, I think, is a slight evolution within the crypto markets. I mean, El Salvador has just announced recently that they're accepting Bitcoin as legal tender. And I think what you're seeing is that there are countries around the world that are potentially going through strife at the moment. They're going through hyperinflation or whatever, and therefore a store of value in a cryptocurrency can be particularly valuable to them, because the cryptocurrency tends to be normally denominated in US dollars. Now, that's not to say that the volatility isn't significant within crypto, because it is. And I think we've seen over the last probably 4 to 6 weeks that crypto went up to something like Bitcoin went up to $64,000, came down to $32,000 and back up to $40,000. So things move around fairly quickly. But I think in terms of being able to make those payments, as Steve was saying, I think sometimes those international payments are very useful within the world of cryptocurrency. And obviously bank currency, government bank currencies, they're all looking at tokenizing their own or turning theirs into a blockchain-based currency. Now, I think blockchain, to an extent, and I'll probably get told off here by all the kind of crypto nutters, is, to an extent, blockchain is not the be-all and end-all. It is a database. It's a way of recording what transactions have happened and who owns what. But I think what we've got to bear in mind is it's an immutable ledger of what's happened. So you can't go back and correct it. You can only add a block to it. And I think the interesting thing is here that it is a safe storage of value as long as it's in the right hands. And the problem is there's so many people that can access those things, and potentially, I mean, originally in the days of Mt. Gox, that's where you saw the kind of original big frauds and hacking scandals taking place, and people losing literally their fortunes. So I think it's really important that we kind of separate out blockchain and its uses as opposed to tokenization and its uses and cybersecurity in its uses. So I think all of them have got a place within the market, but I think that they have to be looked at individually. And I also think, sorry, I'm going on a bit now, but we also have to consider that there's different types of blockchains that have certain benefits and certain disadvantages. So, for example, at the moment, the Ethereum blockchain, if you want to do a transaction on the Ethereum blockchain, then the gas fees are prohibitively expensive if you're doing something at a low value. So how does that couple with other things that we're trying to do or other fintech sectors are trying to look at? But I think blockchain is here to stay. I don't think that people should automatically assume that anything to do with blockchain is automatically to do with crypto, which I think is the common misconception at the moment. So I think that there needs to be more education around blockchain as a tool rather than as a currency in itself.
Okay, thank you. Anu, if you can't to define a good cyber security strategy into 3 pillars, what will be those 3 pillars?
All right, okay. It's interesting. I mean, the key thing about cyber is it shouldn't.
We are not hearing very well, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Yes.
I'm going to have to shout a little bit, yes?
Yeah.
So I'll try and remember to shout. It's interesting. I mean, a good cyber security strategy should really be part of an organization's business strategy and not something separate in its own right. That's the first thing I will say. And, you know, a lot of people equate cyber as something that belongs to the technical department and should be looked after in that arena. But for us, we always advocate that good cyber is about good business and taking informed business decisions and being able to understand the risk to your organization, because that's what cyber in essence is, a risk and an opportunity, and it should be viewed in that way. So in terms of the pillars for a good cybersecurity strategy, the first one for me is always going to be leadership and governance. So every organization should be ensuring that the leadership team understands the cyber threat landscape and what the impacts are to their business, and that they also have appropriate governance in place that promotes a positive cybersecurity culture. And there will also be compliance requirements in a lot of the regulated industries. You know, those will be greater in terms of what you have to comply with. For example, the energy sector, financial services with the regulators, and so on. So I think the first thing is you need to make sure you understand what it is that cyber means to you as an organization, and a holistic cybersecurity strategy should encompass people, processes, and technology, which is absolutely key. And the strategy should also align with the organization's strategic vision and prioritize short-term, medium, and long-term goals, which take into account, coming back to Steve's earlier point, appropriate resources and budgets. Because like anything else, this is an investment decision in terms of what you do about these threats and the opportunities that come with cyber. The second pillar, the key one, another key one for me is, you know, for organizations, most organizations are not greenfield sites and certainly not banks, and they need to continue to run their business, but they have huge investments they've already made in the business as well. So in order to stay abreast of and ahead of the game, you know, things like regular risk assessments, including IT health checks, you know, are absolutely key. They provide the gap analysis that allows organizations to understand their latest vulnerabilities and, again, to prioritize where they need to focus effort and maybe investment. And it also gives the organization the assurance that it's taking a risk-based and proportionate measures to detect, prevent, and mitigate against attacks. And all this goes back to public confidence and stakeholder confidence, that you can show that even if some people say, and people do say, that cyber attacks are inevitable, at least you've taken responsible measures to mitigate against them and to address the risks. And you can't really ask for more than that from an organization. And the final piece is, the third pillar for me is practice what you preach. Organizations, as a matter of priority, should be about ensuring that their employees, all the way from the board to the front line, receive up-to-date awareness and training on how cyber affects their organization and their day-to-day roles and responsibilities. Their organization should also, rehearse for the eventuality of managing a cyber incident. This should be supported by up-to-date documentation in the form of an incident response and disaster recovery plan. And that should be tested and exercised regularly with all those that have roles and responsibilities in that, frequently briefed, so that they can act out and mitigate any cyber threats to the organization. So for me, those are some of the core pillars that make a good cybersecurity strategy response.
Okay, thank you so much, Anu. Margaret, we are right now in a permanent innovation process, and technologies renewal, and appears new technologies like Mike mentioned before with blockchain. In the case of the fraud landscape, what technologies work best for fraud detection right now?
So there are a whole host of technologies around, and most organisations would be spoiled for choice. I think a good example of how data can be drawn together to provide relevant intelligence across a wide range of businesses to identify and prevent fraud is the CIFAS system. So that stands for I've forgotten what it stands for now. But essentially, that is one of the ways that intelligence is shared across the public and private sector to deal with the fraud problem. But the problem is it's just not big enough. It's not something that reaches enough of a network in order to prevent fraud. I think whilst we can talk about things like artificial intelligence and machine learning and all these types of technologies will in time provide the opportunities and the solutions, but for the moment I think it goes back to my first point, which is actually to concentrate on the technologies that we already have, particularly within law enforcement agencies, and creating awareness, a bit like Anu mentioned as well, awareness and training amongst those organisations that are there to protect us from fraud and to try and prevent it and detect it in advance, and rather than doing things the old way. So some of our customers, for example, use technology to analyse transactions within bank statements to identify from criminals what is legitimate income, what isn't. Can we prevent any future attacks based on the data that we have from the bank accounts? But there are still organisations that do this sort of work manually, and that takes up a lot of time and effort, which could obviously be spent investigating and preventing further attacks. So I think there are a whole host of technologies, but what needs to happen is that they're more accessible between the private and the public sector on a greater scale, rather than just technologies within individual organisations. I think there's a lot of data that could be shared, but obviously that would have to be in a way that subject to safeguards and appropriate authority and use and that kind of thing.
Okay, super. Steve, you are part of the payment ecosystem. So in part of that, what value do you add to the ecosystem and to the financial service sector as a whole? Maybe efficiency, maybe safety, maybe control, or maybe all in one?
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. So we do encompass all in one, but we split the view into looking at the world from the perspective of the end customer, and that can be a consumer or a business. And also looking at the world from the perspective of the service provider. And the service provider can be the banks, it can be the payment processors, it could be a national initiative. Some of those service providers are looking to provide security, convenience, they're looking to provide greater visibility as well as control. So some of the platforms that we support for the service providers, for the central banks and the payment processors, are all about providing a secure national infrastructure. A number of them are actually protected national platforms, so they sit at the heart of the commercial operation of the country. One of those is the example of the work we do in Iceland, where we've put a very small country with about 330,000, 340,000 people in its entire population, and there are about 500 million electronic documents hosted in a central database from all different service providers for all the history of your transactions, everything that you may have done historically, and you can access that content through any of the connected banks, which is all the banks in the country, as well as the digital government platforms. So it's really about putting an entire country online, providing for the end customers, the consumers and the business users, all of the convenience, as well as the security and the safety of knowing that the information they're accessing and the payments they're making are genuine and they are for the institutions that they're supposed to be for. In other parts of the world, there are major issues around billing and payment processors and fraud. There are major issues around billing and payment processors and lack of security. And there's also major issues around cost of facilitating billing and payment for some countries. So it simply costs a lot of money to get paid, depending on where you are in the world. So we try to help countries to evolve their processes and to make it easier and faster and cheaper for consumers to pay their bills, as well as being far more convenient. So if you take a historical example, 10, 15 years ago, even today in some countries, people still walk with a physical piece of paper into a branch to pay a bill. And sometimes they stand in line for 10 minutes or half an hour. And when they get to the front of the queue, they pay a convenience fee to allow them to make a payment for a bill that they owe. And I know I can see some of you smiling. That is very true. And it's still happening today in hundreds of millions and billions of cases a day all around the world. And if you can imagine going from that to being able to tap on your phone, receive your bill, schedule a payment, and make it all happen electronically, clearly there's some huge benefits for the country there as well, which can lead to some pretty major financial benefits for the entire economy. Yeah, all of those things that you mentioned, Claudio, are relevant, and they're relevant to the different users of the system as well as for the people who are providing the services.
Okay, thank you so much, Steve.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Michael, blockchain is a relative new technology, and we are talking here about security. So how safe is blockchain, and how is it best used in the fintech sector?
Okay, big questions. I don't know if I'm the expert in kind of blockchain security, but as far as I'm aware, the blockchain itself obviously is an immutable ledger, meaning someone can't go back and alter something within that block that has already been cast in stone. They can only add something to a future block. So in that sense, I think it's very good in terms of for transaction reporting and certain functionality. So for example, we will be using the blockchain capabilities in our central securities depository. So what we want to do is we want to have an immutable record, or what we call a golden record of truth, of exactly who the owners are of those tokens. So I think in that sense, we would have that golden record of truth. Does that mean that someone can't hack into our systems to access it? Probably not. So I think, Anu would be able to explain that stuff far better than I will. But I think what it is we're actually utilizing two different storages of data. So we got our central securities depository, which everything is recorded on the blockchain, and certain people with certain permissions, including the regulator and our kind of trusted counterparts, would be able to access certain information. Other parts people can't access because they don't have the private key in order to get onto it. I think throughout the kind of fintech sector, then again, previously, I think it's a fantastic tool, but it's just a tool. I don't think personally, especially when you're talking about securities, and I'm not talking about cyber security, I'm talking about securities as in equities, bonds, financial securities. I think it's really important that there is a blockchain at some point that will be synonymous with the securities industry. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's a number of different chains out there that potentially have interoperability between various things, because most of them are based on Ethereum. But I think what needs to happen in the future is there probably needs to be a quantum resistant blockchain that is publicly that is a public blockchain, so therefore several people are voting as to what the capacity is for something like that. And that actually fits better with regulators as well, because it means that you don't have a private blockchain that in effect could be manipulated by one set of individuals. So I think there's certain hallmarks that would be preferential to the securities and fintech industry as opposed to others. But I think ultimately, it's not really the blockchain itself, as far as I'm aware, that people are worried about getting hacked itself. It's people accessing where those tokens are stored and how they're stored, and being able to move them out from one person's wallet into another person's wallet. So, for example, in our ecosystem, we have effectively a walled garden around it. Because we're deep trading in securities, you can't, in the same way that you can with crypto, you can't just transfer them to anyone outside the ecosystem, because they don't necessarily have the regulatory permissions to move a tokenized security from one place to another, because that would be a breach of securities law. So we're keeping all of those securities in our kind of walled garden, and then we have a golden record of truth stored on the blockchain as well, to say who did own all of those securities. So God forbid one system got hacked, then we've got fail-safe measures in place where we could effectively burn all the tokens and reissue them back into the wallets. But I think the fintech sector definitely has use of blockchain. I think it is here to stay. I think it's going to evolve. I think there's certain things that people will do better. I think the security around the systems that give you access to it are exactly where people need to be focusing on the cybersecurity. But I think, yeah, I think blockchain is an enabler for the future, but it's not the be all and end all.
Okay, I agree with that, and thank you so much. So we are right now approaching to the end of this great panel. So I have a last question to all of you, and please try to answer in 1 minute, please. The question is, how can you connect your solutions and your offering and your markets with the markets, taking account that the difference between the developed markets like maybe UK or Europe and the Latin American market throughout your solution?
Who do you want to go first?
Okay. Anu?
So yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah. So taking into account those kind of the obvious differences between language, culture, and so on, you do have to take those into account when you're looking at solutions you're providing, and also the nature of the threats that are in those regions. Because, for example, where ransomware, mobile banking are the kind of things that are, on the increase in Latin America more so than in terms of some other parts of the world. So you need to take into account the geography and all of that. You also need to take into account the maturity of the region and the legislation requirements. So the way we get around that, in answer to your question, Claudio, is we use international standards and best practices and in-country requirements, regulatory requirements and data protection laws to create the baselines that are needed. And they're always customized to the organization as well as the sector. So what you're doing is you're putting in proportionate responses, and things like the board briefings that we do, the leadership training, the cybersecurity awareness training courses, and so on, are developed and very bespoke for the organization. We're working with a Forex company in Mexico who are headquartered in Mexico at the moment. And with them, we are being very specific about their organizational requirements, not just within Mexico, but how they roll that out globally as an international Forex company, for example. And the same applies to any other solutioning that you're doing. You have to be very specific so that there are measurable outcomes in terms of what you do. And they do make a difference, and they also take into account what's already there and the support that's already available. Next.
Thank you. Margaret.
Okay, so although our main customer base is in the UK, the subjects around fraud, cybercrime investigations are the same around the world, and particularly with COVID, the rise in online crime and all of these things they're exactly the same anywhere you go, in some places more severe than others. So in that sense, I would say that we can apply the technology that we have here in the UK in exactly the same way in Latin America, through awareness, training, and implementing these platforms to stop manual, time-consuming processes, and to use the technology that's available through companies like ours in order to get the result faster, prosecute people quicker, and actually just prevent the crimes happening in the first place. So I don't think there should be any real difficulty in applying what law enforcement use in terms of technology from Altia or any other organization to target financial crime or any other sort of cybercrime. There shouldn't be any difference applying that to Latin American countries.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claudia, and thanks for hosting the session today. So yes, very similar to the other speakers. The way we approach talking to new countries and looking at the opportunities of digitizing, whether it's payments or digital content, is to look at where most benefit can be derived for the end customers. In many countries, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean, we're focusing on the mobile channel as the primary route to the customer, but that can also include kiosks, it can include branches, it can include local services provided through things like ATM machines, as well as your more traditional access through computers and the use of the internet. So we start by looking at the channels, and we start by looking at which portals and which organizations have the most secure and trusted access on those channels, whether it's banks, whether it's individual government portals, whether it's branded portals, so consumer brands, and we typically start by looking at those areas.
Thank you so much. Mike, you are the last and you close.
Okie doke. And again, thank you, Claudio, and fellow panelists for the panel. I think in terms of what we're looking at, we are looking at the world. So we are currently in talks with regulator in Mexico. We are hopefully going to be applying to join the regulatory sandbox in Mexico. We have spoken to the government in Colombia as well about doing some stuff in Colombia. And we really do want to be a global stock exchange. So we want to have it financially inclusive and equal access to everyone in whatever currency. Now, does that mean we're going to get there day one? Probably not, because currency, not just currency, but cultural differences, language differences, etc. We've got to take into account. But we are firmly committed to making this a global exchange. So we definitely want to be in Latin America. We see that as one of the pivotal kind of points of where we do want to be. And it is about how we can potentially do something in certain jurisdictions that previously people don't have access to. So that's where we want to go, and that's hopefully where the communities themselves will also want us to be based.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you to you all for share your insights and also your thoughts. And I hope we can to collaborate more and more through Latin American and UK markets. Thank you. See you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.